Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our seminar very shortly. We would like to take a few more minutes to prep for the event. Please bear with us 1 or 2 more minutes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout today's seminar, we are providing Korean English translation service. Joining us over YouTube, you can also select your language. And on the table, you may be able to find translation receivers. Channel 1 is Korean and Channel 2 is English. So if you require the interpretation service, please use the receivers in front of you. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we'd like to begin 2024 Green Week seminar, jointly prepared by British Embassy Seoul and also KLRI. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Green Week seminar, jointly organized by the British Embassy Seoul and the Korean Legislation Research Institute. I am Jong-mee, the director of the Department of Future Legislation at the Korea Legislation Research Institute, and I will serve as your MC today. As the global agenda shifts towards achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, the need for comprehensive collaboration becomes increasingly apparent. It is evident that addressing the challenges of climate change requires collective efforts beyond the capacities of individual entities or nations. Thus, it is paramount to outline the direction and substance of collective endeavors aimed at realizing carbon neutrality, and for that reason, we have prepared this seminar. As I mentioned earlier, we are providing YouTube live streaming using KLRI YouTube channel. We are providing both English and Korean, so you can select whichever language that you prefer. Now, before we proceed with today's seminar, we would have an opening address from President Young-soo of the Korea Legislation Research Institute. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Han Young-soo, President of Korea Legislation Research Institute. As was just mentioned, I believe that climate issues and also environmental issues require government and also businesses and also general public's interest and attention. And just to do so, the British Embassy Seoul has prepared this Green Week event, and we are delighted to join the embassy to prepare this event, and we would like to thank everyone for attending despite your busy schedules at today's forum. Special thanks go to His Excellency Ambassador Colin Crooks. And for your information, His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, will be also delivering a keynote address and set the direction for today's discussions. And I would like to also thank Honorable Deputy Head of Mission Gareth Weir of the British Embassy Seoul for their wholehearted support and interest, and also for delivering the closing remarks today. And I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to Chairman Sang-hyup of the Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission for joining us today to deliver his congratulatory remarks. Last December in Dubai, there was a COP28, and we had an event at the sidelines of the COP28 event, and Chairman Kim attended and graced us with his presence there, and it's great to see you again today. Today, humanity faces numerous challenges that threaten human life. At this very moment, we have escalation of crises such as the Russia, Ukraine, and Israel and Hamas conflicts. And starting from late 2022, we started seeing a rapid development of the AI technology, and altogether they are rapidly and increasingly jeopardizing human life, rights, and societal order. And amidst all these challenges and threats, the single most critical challenge, however, I would say, is the climate crisis. I believe that the impact and destructiveness of the climate crisis will have on human society cannot be compared to the threats posed by wars or AI, and the climate crisis is characterized by the fact that it cannot be addressed solely by the efforts of specific companies or a few countries. Back in 2022, I understand that in the UK there was a very serious drought, and also in January this year, there was a nationwide flood, and that impacted many lives in the UK. Again, a single person, a single business, or a single country cannot address the problem of the climate crisis. Considering the severity and destructiveness of the climate crisis, along with the characteristics of climate challenges, I believe that the key to solving the climate crisis lies in fostering cooperation and solidarity among nations to address the problem, and also to develop alternative technologies and green technologies. And our greening efforts, we must remember, is not an obstacle to economic growth, but rather an accelerator to our economic growth. The UK government enacted the Climate Change Act in 2008 for the first time in the world, and also it set up an independent climate change committee, leading the way with unwavering net zero policies, setting an example for countries worldwide. And many countries are benchmarking the UK for its insights. In Korea, since the enactment of the Framework Act on Low Carbon and Green Growth in 2010, the Korean government has been making significant efforts to fulfill its roles and responsibilities as a global pivotal state in the international community's response to the climate crisis. And it has also proven that economic growth and climate change resolution can go hand in hand. The administration under President Yoon Suk-yeol has pledged to double its current level of green ODA to developing countries by 2027. And last November, together with Prime Minister Sunak in the UK, they signed a Downing Accord and committed to do their utmost to realize net zero. Likewise, the Korean government is seeking close cooperation with many countries, including the UK, in order to realize net zero and to address climate challenges. And also, it is trying to serve as a bridge between developed and developing countries. Against this backdrop, today's forum aims to address international cooperation for climate crisis response and cooperation between central and local governments within a country. Through this, we hope to create a meaningful platform for sharing the policies and experiences of the UK and South Korean governments in addressing the climate crisis. For the discussions today, we have Managing Director Srini Nagarajan and many presenters and discussants here with us. So I'd like to thank you in advance. We see a rapid development of AI, and AI can even draw pictures on behalf of people. So I've wondered, if we were to ask AI to draw a picture of the current climate crisis facing humanity, what sort of picture would that be? I did not actually do it, but my guess is that it will depict a rough and perilous ocean devoid of any starlight, with the entire world aboard a single ship navigating forward. So it's just an imagination. Hopefully, today's forum will serve as another shining beacon amid humanity's perilous journey. Before I close, I would like to thank British Embassy Seoul and everyone there, as well as KLRI, especially the climate change legislation team, for your many efforts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your remarks. And now, we will invite Mr. Kim Sang-hyup, Chairman of the Presidential Commission on 2050 Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth. So, please welcome Chairman Kim for the congratulatory remarks.
I came to learn the UK ambassador, Crooks, is going to deliver his speech in Korean. So I decided to do my opening remark in English, badly broken English. So I truly congratulate the British Embassy Seoul Green Week, and that's why I wear green jacket to celebrate this important event. And thank you indeed, Ambassador Colin James Crooks, who prepared this meaningful event. And I also thank President Han Young-soo of the Korea Legislation Research Institute. And I express my deep gratitude to all the participants, including speakers and discussants. Well, today's topic, I understand, is about international development cooperation and the role of central and local government. It is really timely topic. Well, as you know, as President Han already said, UK has led the way for sustainability for many decades. And I remember vividly in the year 2008, UK has introduced the Climate Change Act for the first time in the world. And UK is the fastest country in the world to phase down the coal-fired power plant, and the fastest country in deploying offshore wind power. It proved its amazing story by acting. And on top of that, UK has led the green thinking and especially green finance. With the kind invitation of the UK Embassy, I had a chance to visit Oxford University last year. I really learned a lot. I thank you again. And Ambassador Collins is an amazing ambassador. He greatly contributed to the historic state visit by Korean President to UK last year, and he solidified the long and strong friendship partnership between the UK and Korea. He forged so-called clean energy partnership, whereby we are going to work together on offshore wind power, future generation, nuclear power, hydrogen, etc. So in terms of green area, I feel UK is Korean's ally. And I do know that UK ambassador feels the same way. Korea did almost same thing around that time. In the year 2008, Korea introduced low carbon green growth as the new national paradigm of Korea. And Korea enacted the Basic Act for Green Growth in 2009. And we have done many things. But and Yoon Suk-yeol administration reconstitute the Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission, and whereby we are going to increase our effort to support international green development. That's why Korean President said we will increase green ODA at least 2 times more by 2027, and President Yoon also contributed to the second replenishment of GCF and the GGGI, which Korea created with the like-minded countries, including the UK. So that means we have a great future together, common ground, even collective future together between the UK and Korea. And also, today's topic is about the cooperation between local and central government. The spirit of Paris Climate Agreement regarding the role between local and central government is very clear. It says new trilateral partnership is important. New trilateral partnership is composed of civil society, business community, and local government. And that's why our commission is strongly supporting the enhanced role of local government. We have done several co-events last year with Seoul, with Jeju, with Gyeongbu, and Jeonnam, etc. And we are going to do that again this year. And last month, we held a special meeting by inviting local government chairpersons for carbon neutrality and green growth. I believe local government, they are the real actors. Central government, we design policies, but local governments are the real actors in terms of implementation. Okay, I have already said too much. And I feel especially important to find out the fact this seminar is supported, organized by Korea Legislation Research Institute. Korea Legislation Research Institute helped a lot in forging the Basic Act for Green Growth Act and emission trading scheme that was done for the first time in Asia. And this institute is also helping us a lot to improve our law and institutions, because laws and institutions are the solid rock to continue this long and tough green journey. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Next, I would like to invite from the British Embassy, Seoul, His Excellency Ambassador Colin Crooks for his keynote address. Collaboration between the two countries to achieve net zero carbon and accelerate the energy transition is the topic of his speech. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Colin Crooks, the British Ambassador to South Korea. Welcome to today's seminar on establishing a collaborative system for realizing carbon neutrality, jointly prepared by the British Embassy, Seoul, and the Korea Legislation Research Institute to discuss bilateral cooperation between our two countries aimed at achieving carbon neutrality and accelerating energy transition. I would like to thank the distinguished guests, including President Han Young-soo and Chairman Kim Sang-hyup. The year 2023 was the hottest year on record. Seeing articles every summer about that year being the hottest summer in recorded history raises concerns that the situation in 2024 will be similar or more severe. Last year, South Korea experienced severe rainfall, resulting in the death of 13 individuals. Such extreme weather events used to occur primarily in a few hot countries in the past. However, this is no longer a problem confined to specific regions. In addition, South Korea has approximately 1.5 times more premature deaths due to deteriorating air quality compared to other OECD countries. Why should we respond to climate change? What benefits would there be if we prepare in advance or take more proactive measures against climate change than we do now? And what direction should the two countries take together to address climate change? To provide an answer, let me briefly introduce the Climate Change Act of the United Kingdom, which is the foundation of our climate change policies. The Climate Change Act of the UK is the world's first primary legislation outlining the UK's approach to greenhouse gas reduction and climate change adaptation. Enacted in 2008, the Act has contributed to the UK's ability to achieve greenhouse gas reduction while sustaining economic growth. It has garnered broad support from various sectors and also has positively influenced the UK government's climate actions. The Climate Change Act includes legally binding long-term targets and also plans for carbon budgets to achieve these goals. Furthermore, to ensure the effective implementation of this law, there is an independent advisory body called the Climate Change Committee, which acts as a control tower, just as Korea has the Presidential Commission on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth. So what were the effects of the enactment of the Climate Change Act in 2008? By establishing long-term goals and also making them legally binding, policymakers and also businesses could prepare in advance for net zero targets. With clear legal obligations, senior government officials became more attentive to climate change. In addition, through midterm planning and regular progress evaluations, the policy decision-making process has been consistently improved. And most importantly, through the independence of the advisory body, the Climate Change Committee, political disagreements could be addressed. For example, in 2010, when the parliament was divided on the roles of renewable energy and nuclear power in the energy sector, Advice was sought from the Climate Change Committee for resolution. The UK government accepted the carbon budget proposed by the Climate Change Committee, and the 2050 net zero target was also adopted and also revised based on the committee's advice. By incorporating long-term goals into legislation and underscoring policy continuity to achieve a net zero, induced stakeholders, including businesses, to actively invest in carbon neutrality and clean energy transition initiatives. As an example, the UK has actively invested in wind power generation, leveraging the characteristics of windy regions. In essence, it replaced coal-fired power generation with wind power, thereby reducing carbon emissions. Why should we be more proactive in responding to climate change than ever before? Carbon neutrality in the UK is more than just climate change mitigation, but represents business opportunities. To seize such opportunities, we must respond more actively to climate change. According to the IMF, achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 would lead to a 7% increase in global economic growth compared to maintaining current transition policies. Furthermore, according to a study in the UK, implementing current carbon neutrality policies could save an average household £6,000 by 2050. According to the Confederation of British Industry, or CBI, which is comparable to the Federation of Korean Industries, the UK's net zero economy grew by 9% in 2023. As a result, thousands of new net zero businesses were already established in 2023, collectively producing £74 billion worth of goods and services in this sector. While the overall UK economy grew by 0.1% in 2023, the net zero economy posted a remarkable growth rate of 9%. In addition, quality jobs were created throughout the UK. In other words, net zero jobs in the green economy, including renewable energy, building energy efficiency, electric vehicles, carbon capture technology, and green finance, receive an average wage that is £10,000 higher than the UK average of £35,400. This clearly indicates that the transition to net zero presents an opportunity for the UK to become a more resilient and productive economy while at the same time addressing climate change. The fact that these quality jobs have emerged nationwide underscores how net zero policies can alleviate regional development imbalances and contribute to overall economic growth. Finally, let me tell you about the efforts both countries, Korea and the UK, are making to combat climate change. Last year, during President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the UK, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy of Korea and the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero of the UK signed a clean energy partnership. The essence of this partnership lies in the energy transition cooperation between the two countries. The Clean Energy Partnership covers a wide range of cooperation areas, including policy cooperation, offshore wind power, nuclear power, hydrogen power facilities, and R&D. Both the UK and South Korea have made various efforts to enhance sustainability. According to the latest Green Future Index by MIT, which measures a country's ability to develop a sustainable low-carbon future, the UK and South Korea ranked 7th and 8th, respectively. Today's event, Green Week, is a platform where the UK and South Korea explore ways to collaborate in addressing climate change and accelerating energy transition. It brings together governments, businesses, and the public to learn, exchange ideas, and take tangible actions towards addressing climate change and promoting sustainability. Today's sessions consist of two parts. The first part focuses on carbon neutrality and international development cooperation, while the second part delves into carbon neutrality and cooperation between central and local governments. Through this seminar, we hope to have in-depth discussions on how local governments in the development sector are contributing to achieving carbon neutrality. I sincerely thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. Let's work together for carbon neutrality and accelerated energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your speech. So you've introduced the Climate Action Act of the UK and also how we can contribute to the carbon neutrality going forward. So before we move on with the seminar, I would like to take some pictures to commemorate this event. So then we will prepare. So we'll set up the podium. So we'll take some pictures and then move on to session 1. So picture time now. Okay, so distinguished guests, if you would like to come up to the stage, we will take some pictures to commemorate this event. So because we are a little bit behind time, we will go straight on to the first session of the seminar. In session 1, we will talk about carbon neutrality and international development cooperation. So now I would like to introduce Mr. Kim Jong-wook, Executive Director of Center for International Development at KDI, who will moderate session 1.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kim Jong-wook from KLRI. It's an honor and pleasure of mine to join this very auspicious Green Week event. Thank you very much for the invitation. Again, we talked about the ODA budget of Korea. It's really big. However, recently there was a move to increase it even further. And based on the latest data, about 35% of the ODA budget is being funneled to greening the earth. So we have energy-intensive manufacturing industry here in Korea, but unlike that domestic circumstances internationally, Korea is via ODA making sincere efforts in order to contribute to climate adaptation. And today, I believe that we'll be learning from the experiences of the UK, which is very beneficial. So or with regard to development cooperation, we will talk about what are the limitations of the ODA system that we have and how better we can collaborate going forward. Climate mainstreaming or climate resilient development in international development cooperation is something that KDI senior researcher is going to present on. So we will hear that presentation, which will be followed by climate mainstreaming and development finance. So without further ado, I'd like to invite our speaker from KDI for the first presentation.
Hello. My name is Mulgyal, Senior Researcher at KDI. As Mr. Kim had mentioned, today I'm going to talk about how to leverage ODA for climate resilient development. So we have done a research for the last 6 months, and I'm going to present on the result of that. First, I'm going to talk about the trend in Korea and how we can make improvements, and third, how we can cooperate going forward. So as the previous presenters have mentioned, climate crisis is becoming more serious. So if you could see the image on the left side, you could see the green circle inside, and there are some lines. And in order for humans to lead a normal life, we need to be contained inside that line. But you could see that we have gone over the boundary in most of the areas, and this is the result of March 2023. And climate change is making the biggest threat to humans as of this research. And so climate crisis is a big threat to us, so what do we have to do? And in the international arena, a lot of people are raising their voices that the development form needs to change. So what did we do before? So usually development programs and projects, policies were created, and the focus was actually on on just reduction of or mitigating climate change. However, now it is the matter of having some balance between adaptation and the mitigation and development. So climate resilient development is the key word now. So let me give you some example. Germany, so 4 departments of the Bundesrepublik are making cooperation and actions to make climate actions. And also, if climate is not considered, then that department will not get any budget. In case of Sweden, they have been pushing for climate mainstreaming very progressively for the last 20 years. And as you could expect, when you implement a policy and when you actually do some projects, people may not be an expert in climate. So as a supplement, climate and environmental expertise group had been launched in 2021, and they have actually given out about 200 advices to those projects. In case of Japan, in September 2023, the Basic Development Act had been revised to provide the legal background for these projects, and also they are pushing for climate mainstreaming by the government to make sure that they are considered in all the projects. Then what's happening in Korea? So as the presenters have mentioned earlier, in Korea, a lot of proactive ODA efforts are being made. If you could look at this graph, so Korea started to grow since 1970, and you could see that Korea's carbon emissions have been growing ever since. In the last 50 years, Korea has been growing economically really fast, but carbon emissions had also grown to match that growth. So we feel that Korea needs to be we need to consider our responsibility and how the global economies are interconnected. And Korea is going to make some more proactive actions so that we could fulfill our responsibility. But then are we ready to do all this? And according to the research, 3 restrictions were first. One is lack of direction setting and guiding principles. So in legislating policies or embarking on projects, a lot of autonomy was given to the project parties. And secondly, climate crisis was not really considered as a major factor. So the environment and climate impact assessment is regarded as a supplementary administrative procedure. And also third, offsetting development effect by duplicating climate or other general projects. It was found as another restriction. So then why do these restrictions arise? So we have evaluated 18 criteria to look at the policy planning, implementation, and outcome, and monitoring, evaluation, and return. So as mentioned earlier, so we cannot no longer rely just on environment and climate impact and assessment. We need to have a comprehensive view. But nevertheless, the policy cooperative governance structure is not developed yet. And also, there is no comprehensive planning to support all this. As for the Korean government, the Green New Deal ODA basic plan and the relevant strategies were submitted. But as mentioned earlier, the climate action and development need to be more balanced now. So we need to have a new systematic approach. And also, we don't have a legal basis to support this. And according to the Basic Act on Official Development, we only have the basic principles. So we do not have the legal basis to push for the the climate actions in a balanced manner. And as for the policy implementation, as mentioned earlier, a lot of discretion is given to the ODA institutions. So from the working level staff, they don't really have to, focus on climate actions or climate mainstreaming, because it's up to them to make the decisions. And also, a lot of projects are dependent on technology. For example, the PV panel development, can be construed as contributing to climate response. So that is where we are at the moment. And I think this is also relevant with the second session. So in case of Korea, we don't really provide a lot of cooperative development assistance to the developing countries. So we looked at the case of Sweden and Japan and other advanced countries. And in those countries, cooperation between central and local government is really important. So in case of Japan, for example, it takes them almost 3 years for the central government and the local government to be fully aligned and for those parties to fully understand each other so that they have the right starting point before they actually begin the project. So I hope today's session could help us in providing and creating this kind of system in Korea too. And also, we do not have a comprehensive strategy in Korea. So we cannot have a full assessment of the projects and the development. And all of the assessment and monitoring needs to be rather sporadic. And also, I'm sure you all know the Rio marker, but we do not really have a Rio marker verification procedure in place. So the working level people can just click some numbers into the system, but there is no verification or validation process of these Rio markers. That is also another restriction. And so what do we have to do to solve all of these issues? So of course there are some little fixes, quick fixes, but there has to be some fundamental system transition. So therefore, that is why we are referring to or want to refer to the climate resilient development that was launched by IPCC. So climate resilient development is very important for us to address the climate crisis. So climate resilient development, CRD, So through CRD, economic development needs to be pursued. So I think we will need to have a new approach, which is based on CRD. What did we do before? We used to have 20, 50, 100 years later, future climate scenarios. And then we did some vulnerability assessment, and we made policies and institutions based on that, really vague future analysis. But then that resulted in, the right measures not being taken in the developing countries, and also resources being wrongfully allocated in areas that maybe do not need those resources. Then what about CRD? So I told you that we, tended to look into the long future, like 20, 50, 100 years later. But CRD is about now. So what does this mean? So what we are experiencing now, the socioeconomic system that we are experiencing now needs to be ensured that they are not restricted by what may happen in the future. So CRD is about considering those things. So therefore, we are going to seek a balance between climate mitigation, adaptation, and development. And also, we think that we can achieve sustainable growth despite climate change and achieve net zero. So the CRD and climate mainstreaming may not really feel concrete to you at this moment, but so there needs to be some basic hypotheses or assumptions to make this actually happen. So if you could look at the graph, so we assume that we need to do certain things in order to meet our goals. So in order to meet our CRD targets, the systems need to be transitioned in the developing countries. So it means that developing countries whose systems are vulnerable to climate change needs to be transitioned to a stronger one. And also the key areas need to be addressed through dialogue. So what do we have to do to ensure that? So it's not just giving money or monetary assistance is not enough. So we have to make sure that these developing countries have all the infrastructure so that they can actually have system transition. Then what needs to be done to provide that kind of infrastructure? So the ODA system needs to be mindful of climate mainstreaming. So in summary, for us to achieve CRD, Korea's ODA climate mainstreaming needs to be done in advance. So how much time do I have? Okay, and so I've mentioned about climate mainstreaming and the restrictions. And so in order for us to resolve those restrictions in the shorter term, we can consider these things. So first of all, we need to have the CRD promotion governance. So in Korea, so the Ministry of Finance and Economy and the Ministry of Diplomacy, Foreign Affairs are the main actors for CRD. But if we compare our ODA compared to other countries, there are more actors in Korea. So in other words, CRD requires a lot of synergy across sectors. It means that in Korea, there are already ODA institutions across all the sectors. And ODA experience had been accumulated abundantly in the last 15 years. So therefore, these ODA institutions, we have many of them. And some people say that those organizations need to be combined together and the number need to decrease, but it's not about that. It's just a matter of having the right CRD promotion governance to oversee all of these institutions. And secondly, we need to have the right system in place. In case of Korea, we do not really have a development cooperation policy that goes across the sectors. So therefore, the CRD organizations or ODA organizations need to play the pivotal role in making those policies and principles so that the ODAs can be done in an efficient manner. And also, we need to have a CRD, the legal basis to promote CRD. So the legal basis that could actually have impact on the budgeting process. And I guess the role of KLRI will be very important for this. And also, we need to find some measures to connect climate actions to SDG. And in case of Japan, the SDG and the climate actions and the conflict between them and the synergy between them are analyzed, and the Japan creates a matrix with all the results. And that matrix can be used for future projects and policy making. So therefore, Korea also needs to be able to develop that matrix. And also, previous ODA projects tended to be technology focused, and that could be a restriction or limitation going forward. So when choosing the cooperative partner, we have to make sure that the socioeconomic development and the need and the infrastructure and all the situation of the recipient country needs to be analyzed in advance so that we just don't end up just giving out our technology know-how. And lastly, the monitoring and evaluation needs to be done more properly. So we will need to have the right incentive system in place. So I talked about the real marker verification not being in place, and we can organize some TFT that could work by different seasons. And also, as Mr. Han Young-soo had mentioned, we could even use AI to supplement the insufficient workforce or money. So maybe we can use AI to do some real marker verification. And as for the incentive system, we could adjust the weight on the international development corporations so that we could give more incentive to do the cooperative projects better. So this is the last page. It's about how we could cooperate going forward. So all the things I mentioned so far is about Korea's ODA system and the climate mainstreaming in Korea. So what should happen after climate mainstreaming? So what should be done in the developing countries, and how do we ensure system transition in the developing countries? So we have to think ahead. So if you took CRD could be a one way, and to achieve that, and we need a comprehensive approach. So Korea's close relationship or cooperation between all the parties need to be there to ensure this between financial institutions, project developers, and research institutes. So we can maybe use the experience of past ODAs. So KDA, KEXIM, and KDI have done a lot of cooperative projects together. And we have done about 700 projects together in more than 97 countries. We don't just build infrastructure, we also provide financial and economic and technological advice. So we have been doing that for the past 20 years. We have a lot of experience and know-how, so we believe that we could play a leading role in providing some advice to the developing countries for their system transition. So our differentiation point is that we've done a lot of KSP projects in advanced countries like Australia, UK, and we are also expanding to European countries, including Italy and so on. So together with UK, maybe we could work together through KSI and do some joint researches so that we could change some infrastructure situation in the developing countries. And secondly, we've had some deep learning period. So how are the climate technologies used? And amazingly, unlike US or the UK, climate technology actually is widely used in Korea for ODA projects. However, compared to the usage level, the R&D is not sufficient. So therefore, maybe Korea and UK can do some cooperative projects to put in more efforts here. So the ambassador mentioned the MIT index, and Korea and UK ranked really high in the climate index. It means that both governments are very committed to climate action, but both companies are lacking slightly behind in terms of energy transition, and that is also an area where Korea and the UK can cooperate going forward. And thirdly and fourthly, which are kind of connected. Fourth, if you just look at ODA in Korea, so climate ODA had been conducted for 118 countries, but if we compare this number to other countries, we could see that the number of ODA projects is smaller, but Korea has supported the most number of countries. So that is why, only small investment can be made in the respective countries. So considering that these kind of ODA impact a wide area, not just the recipient country, we may need to have a more coordinated cooperative projects, and maybe multiple sectors can be combined into one project, and we could have some signature programs. So, for example, Korea, the Kexim Bank has been promoting the program projects more proactively, program lending more proactively. So maybe we could use this program lending to promote signature programs going forward. But then think about the signature program. So in order for this to be done effectively, we have to make sure that the space and time of the recipient country to be split between Korea and other participating countries. So here we could consider, energy efficiency and SME promotion and industries and also increasing carbon sinks and so on. And lastly, I want to talk about researches. So for policy development and project development, there need to be some references and benchmarks. And to provide this, a lot of cooperation need to be made between the research institutes. So maybe I could ask KAPE and KLRI to collaborate further going forward. I have a question. So we are increasing ODA, but governance is just, there. So it's not really improving. So actually that is an area of concern. So strategic consistency, there's a lot of, concerns. But if you think about it, we don't have consistent governance, and that is why we have these problems. So we do a lot of ODAs, and there are other advanced countries that do a lot of ODA, and there's usually a government organization that is responsible for this. And have you felt the need to have this kind of organization in Korea while you did the research? So I'm just talking about the research, the research implications. Yes, as you mentioned, I do feel that need to have that government organization. So when we talk about climate mainstreaming, and if we go into other conflicts, we have to think incrementally. So is all the existing issues added by the climate crisis? But we need to have a systematic shift. So otherwise, climate mainstreaming cannot be achieved under the current system. And the governance, as you mentioned, is an important factor too. So what the KLRI is saying is that we need to have the laws legislated to provide some legal background to allow for these changes. And also there has to be some cultural changes. And also we need to have the legal basis to have actual changes happening. So please, work on this going forward. Thank you.
Please give a big hand for. So I'd like to invite Mr. Srini Nagarajan, who is Managing Director and Head of Asia at British International Investment. So BII is somewhat unique institute in British context. So far we do not have DFI, but British is, United Kingdom is one of the leading countries in DFI installment and implementation. So he has various experience in private sector and public sector as well, and he has also leading some developing issues in India and Southeast Asian countries, and also he focused on the climate change issues because BII has a plan for increase and make a commitment at least 30% of his the function into the climate change issues. So we'd like to hear and share his expertise and knowledge on those climate change issues, utilizing his experience and his function, core function in the DFI. Please.
Good afternoon, President Han and my colleagues from the British Embassy, and thank you for organizing this. I'm Srini Nagarajan. I head Asia for BII, and BII stands for British International Investment, which is the world's oldest DFI. It's 75 years old. And we have stood the test of time for a long period of time, really. I'm making this presentation jointly with my colleague Umberto, who will be running a few of the slides, and I'll be running the initial slides, and I'll be coming back. Sorry, that's a disclaimer. Let me just take, I'll just take 5 minutes and tell you a little bit about BII. As I said, we are the world's oldest DFI, been around for 75 years. We come under what is called Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, but we operate on an arm's length from the UK government. We have an independent board and an independent investment committee. Some of us, I'm a member of the IC, and the way we take decisions is pretty independent. We operate in Africa, Asia, and more recently into the Indo-Pacific. It's more a re-entry for us. We have been there before. We just come back to these markets, really. Leave alone the slides. I'll tell you a few things about what we do, which is more interesting for you. Development impact and commercial capital are always very difficult to strike a balance, right? In a world where we want to deliver development impact, being commercial requires patient capital. If you try and hurry things up, it won't work out. So our ability to be much more patient using our UK government capital is extremely valuable for us. If you consider the world in the mid-90s, when we started investing private equity, there used to be 3 streams of capital. One is the philanthropy capital, second one is the impact capital, third one is the very commercial capital, the blue-blooded investors is what they call. Philanthropy used to experiment on concepts, on development, move that to impact. Impact tried to do this to some scale, and then it moved to commercial. We had the luxury of time then. Today, we don't have the luxury of time. We have to really condense that time. Microfinance, when I started careers, microfinance used to be in philanthropy. It moved to impact, and then it moved to commercial. Today, we have to condense this because climate and poverty are very linked to each other. So we got a dual goal. We got inclusion, which is poverty alleviation. And inclusion is a very important theme for us, given the fact that our capital is meant for people who are earning less than $5.50 a day. And climate is a very important theme for us. So we got to make sure that we are able to combine these forces and act in a much more cohesive manner between the developed countries, investing into the developing countries. So that's one factor I wanted to say. So the way we measure development impact is through the lens of productive, sustainable, and inclusive. Now, this is a very important measure. Development impact is very difficult to measure if you try and look at we have a fairly sophisticated way of measuring development impact. Productive is about catalyzing markets, reducing the cost of goods and services, creating more jobs. And there, of course, gender is a very important part. It's lovely to see many women in the room. Sustainability is our ability to transition to a net zero by 2050. That's very important for us. And third one is inclusive, as I talked about, is raising incomes from both what we need. We invest in 3 sectors: infrastructure, financial services, industry, technology, and services. And we invest through debt, equity, and technical assistance. We invest both directly and indirectly. Directly, we do debt, equity, and mezzanine products. Indirectly, we invest through funds as well. Now, I think what is critical for us is not the products are not that critical for us. It's very sectorally focused. We are very product agnostic and very sectorally focused. Our geographies which we invest are India, particularly in South Asia is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. In Africa, from Cape to Cairo, we invest in all markets. Indo-Pacific is Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Cambodia, Laos, 5 countries. We don't do Thailand, we don't do Malaysia, because we consider those markets to be more developed. We are a true development financial institution. And Caribbean, of course. Of course, the Caribbean, we only invest currently in Barbados, and that's, of course, through the fund structure. In every company where we invest, we really impart very high environmental, social, and governance practices, business integrity. We normally set up ESG committees in companies, which we spearhead along with the employees of company to inculcate higher standards on environmental, social, and business integrity. Because at the end of the day, I'll tell you something that, look, if ESG practices, business practices, integrity does not percolate down the line in the organization, it can remain in isolation at the very senior level. So it has to cascade through the entire risk management framework of the institutions. Whether you're talking about banks or whether you're talking about hospitals, it has to cascade down the line. And of course, our partnership with the UK government is very important for us, and we are a part of what is called British International Partnerships, of which we are one important component of. The other ones are UK Export Finance, we got Department of Business and Trade, we got PIDGE, we got Infraco Asia, and Mobilist and Garanco. So these are the various constituents, and we are the most important constituents there. Now, the other few things I wanted to say, over the last 75 years, we've seen a lot of cycles of investments. That has given us an ability to build a track record in various emerging markets. And we are willing to take much greater risks. We can come in early in businesses, and we are willing to take much greater risks as opposed to coming in later. The role of a DFI, Development Financial Institution, is to take greater risks. And by taking greater risks and coming in early, we crowd in more private capital. Our job is not to crowd out private capital. Our job is to crowd in private capital. That's very critical for us. As we talked about, mobilization is a very important theme of what we do. These are our total balance sheet is around $10.5 billion. It's completely funded by equity. We have no debt on our balance sheet. And our annual commitments normally ranges anywhere between $2 to $2.5 billion. This figure, I think, has to go up. And we operate in 65 countries currently. Number 2, do you want to take it up? Yeah, sure. I'll come back here.
Thank you, Srini, for the introduction. My name is Umberto. I work at BII, of course. So I would like to take a few minutes to run you through the approach that we have established for climate change and our climate change strategy. As a reminder, we are, as a DFI, we are a financial institution foremost, and we always only exclusively invest into private sector businesses. As a financial institution, we follow the best practices and the standards of the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure, which has this 4 pillars which we have adopted and included into everything that we do as part of our climate change strategy. As an institution, as I said, we do not only invest into climate finance, but in everything that we do follow, and we do take climate into consideration, and our climate strategy addresses every aspect of what we do, be it climate or non-climate, directly climate related. So we embedded our climate objectives into our strategy, into our tools at transaction level, as we will see, as well as at portfolio. At portfolio level is embedded into the financial instrument we do, into our financial institutional ambition, as well as into our perspective in terms of how we see particular asset classes or sectors, how we see investment opportunities, and how to build internal capabilities that we can then bring to our investees to help them in their climate transition. We have a strong system of internal governance to look after the implementation of our strategy in terms of board oversight, management oversight, constant monitoring of the portfolio to ensure we have accountability and proper responsibilities for the implementation of the content on the strategy. I will get into the exact ambition in a moment. This is just a general governance structure that we use. Then, of course, we look at risk management for our company, for all the investees. We look at climate risk. We assess our climate appetite as an organization, and we look at the physical transition risk of all investees. This is particularly important both at individual transaction level as well as at portfolio level, to see how our investees will be affected by climate change, how they prepare to tackle those challenges, and how we have properly considered these risks as part of our evaluations of the investees as well. The fourth pillar is about metrics, which is essentially important for us to have a full view about where we stand versus a strategy. So we track the emissions of our whole portfolio. We track the actual investment in climate finance. We track, as I said before, transition and physical risks in all the companies that we invest into, with the help for them to be more resilient to those risks. And we have a clear appetite as a company in terms of how much climate risk we can bear and how to support investees to reduce this risk. Shall I? Just a flip slide, how's it work? How can I flip slides? This one here? Thanks. Thank you. So going a bit more of detail, there are 3 main blocks of our climate strategies, and here we get into a bit more of the detail, which are aligned with the Paris Accord. First of all, as part of as one of the UK government's financial institutions, we have committed formally and externally to become net zero by 2050. This is the most important building block for us. The second one is about just transition, as in making climate finance work for the people. This has many dimensions. It's about job creation, upskilling, getting resilient sectors, and essentially, to make it very simple, make it work for individuals. That's what it boils down to. The third building block, equally important, is about adaptation as resilience, which is maybe an area where private capital has traditionally struggled to make inroads, but we see this very essential, and we seek it in terms of making sure, helping the companies we invest into to become more resilient and more adaptable to climate change, as well as to invest specifically into companies so that they can provide solutions for other companies as well in terms of become more adapted and resilient. So investments which have the objective of supporting a company which has a solution applicable in this space, where the adaptation resilience is their core mandate and the core business value proposition. I mean, I'll go briefly here in terms of what does it mean for us to be net zero. And of course, there are many varieties of commitment in terms of what it means to be net zero. We look at it in two ways, in a very ambitious way, probably, both at individual investments as well as at the portfolio level. So for every individual investment that we make, we look at whether it is net zero aligned. So what do we mean by that? We look at whether it qualifies as, at the most basic level, an investment is net zero aligned if it is climate finance. And climate finance means renewable energy production, if it is production of waste, better efficiency, energy efficiency, transmission and distribution infrastructure for renewable energy generated energy, for example. So this is the basic. As an organization, as was mentioned before, we have an objective of at least 30% of our investments to be climate finance. In reality, the actual figure for us last year was 47%, actually. So 30% is the very bare minimum of what we do. And we have clear exclusion of things that we don't do in terms of, for example, oil or gas upstream and exploration. But of course, the gray area is always about the things which is in the middle between the exclusion list and the climate finance. And here we have a variety of criteria that we look at whether an investment fits with our criteria. And it's about being aligned essentially with national determined contributions, national pathways, best practices in terms of stranded risk assets, and a variety of standards that are there in the market. But what's important to say here is that climate investing is not just renewables, it is about the whole sectoral transformation, and therefore that's why we have a nuanced approach in terms of broader. We look at all the investment that we look at how they are aligned with our climate strategy and how they are on the path towards decarbonization. And I want to add here that only last year we launched a pilot technical assistance facility run by BII to provide help to the companies we invest into to become net zero aligned. So it's an additional offering we're piloting and ramping up this year. In addition to that, this is at the investment level. Then of course we look at this as a corporate level as well. And the way it works very, very simply is that we baselined our portfolio emission. We looked at how much we emit, essentially, calculated it, and we've created a path towards getting to net zero by 2050 with metrics and milestones in this regard. So we want to, as an investor, emit only what is our fair share of the carbon budget and reduce this budget accordingly over time. Something which is not mentioned here but maybe worth saying is that we are a emission reduction first and not a offsetting first institution. So we look at reducing emission as a first and primary objective, and only when this is absolutely not possible, then we allow for some offsetting of the emissions that are not yet reduced. I mean, I will go into maybe some few examples here, and then Srini can jump in if there is time, and please let me know if you're running short. This is just examples of our work in, maybe that's the best way you might find it more interesting, I think, is this one here. This is just an overview of our climate and infrastructure portfolio in Africa, which is over 2.2 billion, and now I think it's more than 2.5 billion. And as you can see, it's very well spread out across the continent. It ranges from power utilities, solar power, wind power, hydropower, a broad range of ways in which we intervene. We have some companies that we own as majority shareholder, which have become leaders in the space of renewable energy generations at the utility scales, very large ones, as well as in the space of off-grid renewable energy generation, solar home systems and commercial industrial home systems, just a few examples. We also have pioneered companies that are investing into transmission and distribution energy in Africa. As you know, the key challenge for energy transition is Africa is electrification, essentially. And the key challenge of electrification is that the transmission and distribution network is not reliable enough, capacity is not sufficient, is not able to attract investors. Governments are short of capital to invest in the T&D systems, so they require private capital. Private capital tends not to get there. And so we're pioneering new ways to attract private capital in this space. Very briefly, this is just another overview of where we are in South Asia, with over now $1 billion of infrastructure investments. And again, maybe we can talk about some examples here. I think, yeah, please.
Sorry, I won't take more than 2-3 minutes. I know we're running short of time. Ayana is a fantastic company which we started in 2018, right from a clean sheet of paper. And this was, the board took 6 months to accept this as a concept, really. We started it from a PowerPoint presentation with an ambition of building 500 megawatts in 5 years. So now it's got 5 gigawatt. It used to be 100% owned by us. Now it's 51. It's more a joint venture between the Government of India sponsored fund called National Infrastructure Investment Fund. Lightsource BP has a stake in this as well. So it's got 5 gigawatt. It supplies round-the-clock power to aluminum smelter plants using pump storage. It's a fascinating story, but what I wanted to highlight here is we started a skill development program in every solar site for training women. One of the important aspects of energy transition is not about shutting coal plants, it's about retraining people. Where do they get jobs? So we retrain people, and mostly women, so that they could get jobs elsewhere. Finally, I think in conclusion, I want to say that, look, in striking a balance between being developmental, see, there will be some emissions if you're developing, really. So if you're emitting too much, then it's difficult. If you have to have some emissions to have development. So striking that right balance between emissions and development is always a very difficult balance, we find in emerging markets. Timing is very critical. Bringing different pools of capital is very important. And what investors are looking for is a steady policy environment, execution, and making sure that there is a track record of having delivered returns. So our job is to work with the different constituents from the developed markets. And if they have ambition to come to the developing countries, work with them and pool the different pools of capital. And with our wealth of experience over 75 years, including ownership stakes, we own one of the largest IPPs in Africa called Globalac. It generates around 2 gigawatt approximately. And we have a T&D platform called Gridworks in Africa, which we own 100% of, really. So we have extensive experience in the entire power generation sector. And we are developing more experience in the climate technology by investing in a number of VC funds. And lastly, we are definitely gaining a lot more experience in terms of adaptation, which of course is a very difficult sector to invest. Water is an important constituent there. So if there is any ambition for coming to emerging markets, we are the right partner. Thank you so much.
감사합니다. 시간이 많이 지연됐기 때문에
Thank you. We are behind time, so all the speakers and the panelists, could you please come up to the stage? So we have to sacrifice our coffee break if we take too much time. So I'm sorry that I was not able to manage time properly, but I think we all have to share the pain. Okay, so if you could quickly come up to the stage, it will be very helpful. Srini, could you also come up, please? Okay, so we've had some very useful presentations. So we've had two presentations. We had two presentations, and we have also heard about some challenging situations in Korea. And then we also heard from BII, who is actually generating success. And we heard about their strategy and performance. So due to time restraint, I would like to ask Jeon Jong-il, director at Kexim Bank, you could either ask a question, or it could be a general question, or you could specify a presenter. Hello, my name is Jong-il, Safeguard Team EDCF Evaluation Operation Review Department at Kexim Bank of Korea. So Korea Bank is in charge of is a EDCF operator. So we do a lot of deliberation for the fund, and we actually execute and evaluate the fund too. So as an ODA institution, so I actually want to talk about what kind of efforts EDCF is doing, providing to contribute to climate mainstreaming. And the first presenter talked about the short-term and the long-term strategies regarding climate resilient development. But I want to talk about from the perspective of the ODA institution, who actually builds infrastructure or make investment or provides lending to the developing countries. So I want to talk on behalf of EDCF. So I want to talk about the climate resilient infrastructure, a smaller scope. So people may have different approaches and different thought process, but when we talk about the climate resilient infrastructure, it's usually infrastructure that is resilient. So this is a general thought. So maybe the heat wave, the flooding, a lot of climate disasters, or they are considered, and people want to make sure that the infrastructures are designed in a way to address or cope with all of those future disasters. But on the other hand, there is infrastructure for resilience. So it's about the residents and communities that are vulnerable to the climate crises, to make them more resilient to these climate changes, who need more infrastructure or facilities to cope with these potential disasters. In these cases, it's not about building facilities, it's about the residents who are actually the users of the facilities. So these are the two areas that we focus on. So I think these two are most very important. And even we don't deploy some very advanced or sophisticated technology, there are ways to build infrastructure that could help the residents to cope with these climate disasters. And I think that is as important. And also, in one of the presentations by BII and also by the first presenter, there was a term lock-in. So infrastructure that are more than 30 years old, and if they are not properly built, actually it takes more money to maintain the facility, and that is a good example of maladaptation. So identifying and during the preparation stage of the project, it's very important to consider all these potential climate-related threats. So it's the same for EDCF. At the very beginning stage of the projects, we want to consider the climate crisis. So we have established the climate crisis or climate change response system in December 2021. So an agreement on the climate actions had been made in December 2021, and I think that was a good transition point. And people said a lot of things at that time, and all the sectors, even those sectors that are not really relevant with climate change, so they also need to be considered for ODA as per the revised system. And also internally and externally, Korea's government is expanding ODA. Thank you. Expanding ODA a lot, and also MOEF has established the climate funding assistance system, and with that we are expanding our assistance movements. Just earlier, BII made a presentation, and DFI is a DFI, so they mainly invest in the private sector. So we have heard about the developers' climate strategy from BII, but we are a ODI operator, so we have a different approach. Of course, we also have another team working on DFI. We have a team working as an ECI, and also those teams have similar strategy as BII, and they refer to the recommendations made by the EDCF team. So EDCF climate change response system has just been explained. So we make sure that throughout the entire project, from identification, preparation, implementation to evaluation, we make sure that the climate change factors are considered throughout the whole process. And also, we try to identify what kind of threats or disasters could happen in the respective areas. We evaluate them, and we evaluate the risk level of the projects, and also we come up with the risk mitigation measures. So one could be reducing greenhouse gas emissions. One way could be to find a way to reduce the climate risk. And also, at this time, we consider the negative effect of climate change on the EDCF projects and vice versa. And also, climate project performance management system is also important. So we make sure we set some criteria in advance so that the performance can be managed according to this qualitative or quantitative criteria. So we do the evaluation throughout the project from the very beginning to the end to make sure that the climate change factors are considered throughout the projects. And the primary reason we do this is to contribute to the climate mainstreaming, and also secondly to help the recipient countries to be more resilient to climate change. The first presenter talked about how Korea's ODA is kind of being bipolarized, and also not much incentive is provided to the people who are working in climate projects. And so as for EDCF, of course, we are doing pilot projects, and we are also pushing for climate mainstreaming. But we have been very humble, and we took all the advice and feedback, and we are trying to make some changes internally too. So we have reflected all of these changes to our internal regulations and principles so that climate factors can be considered in all the projects that we do. And also, the first presenter mentioned that we need some process to verify the real markers. And as for the real marker, we make sure that the manager of the project does not mark the real marks. So there's another committee. So there's a marker council consisting of the experts in this area to do the real marking. That is a way to ensure objectivity of all the projects and assessments. Because of lack of time, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm a very bad timekeeper. So I'd like to move on to Ms. Song Ji-hye. She's all the way from KIP. Thank you. We talked about climate mainstream for ODA, and also that's an area that I study. And I also study different policies and laws related to ODA. And also in the past, I was a policymaker. So with regard to the two presentations, I'd like to share some comments and also ask some questions. With regard to the first presentation, we talked about climate mainstreaming and also some of the limitations involved. Thank you very much. With regard to principles, it was mentioned how there is a lack of direction and also principles. If you think about ODA planning, for ODA mainstreaming, policies and strategies, and also legal basis, yes, they are lacking. And also, indirectly, even if they do exist, they also require a lot of improvements. The International Development Committee did accept green ODA strategies. However, even that strategy doesn't really specify in which area, which project are to be undertaken. Climate mainstream and also CRD-related strategies are basically non-existent. As a researcher, climate mainstreaming is not about what you're going to do, but how we're going to do ODA projects. I think that it's about implementation method. So again, as the speaker mentioned, I think that climate resilient development requires more guidelines and also strategies with regard to how the projects are to be implemented. And second, it was mentioned how the characteristics of climate crisis is not taken into consideration, and how there is a bifurcation of climate and non-climate projects. It was also mentioned that ODA managers are working in silos. Now, if you look at project identification, of course, we heard about EDCF, and also we have KOICA in Korea. There are big ones. However, if you think about smaller ODA agencies, they solely rely on individual managers. So let's say education ODA manager would identify education needs and identify projects related to that, and education experts would review the project, and the project will be undertaken. So if a project is developed dedicated to a specific field, then as the speaker mentioned, I think that climate resilient development may not be implemented. And also the ODA manager, although they may be subject matter expert, they're not really motivated to think about climate mainstreaming. As a matter of fact, back in 2013, we had ODA projects, and also we studied their contribution to climate change mitigation, and we've learned that the projects that are not really involved in the climate or forestry, they're not really showing real markers. So all in all, what I'm trying to say is that Korean ODA, starting from planning to implementation, climate resilient, climate resilience parameters need to be established to be monitored appropriately, and I completely agree to that. And at my organization, KIEP, have for many years emphasized this point. However, I think that so far there were no concrete improvements. So since KDI is undertaking similar research, why ODA stakeholders in Korea, there is no changes in their paradigm or their awareness or understanding. So I hope that this would lay the ground for us to better collaborate to raise that awareness. So there are such limitations. And so how are we going to realize climate resilient development? And the speaker actually proposed different directions and methods. And I have one question related to that. So the basic premise in your presentation is that ODA managers, whether they're developers, whether they're managers, or whether they're responsible for assessments, they need to understand climate issues, and they have to have the willingness to undertake CRD. And my impression was that your basic premise was that that is the case, but in reality, that is not the case in Korea. I'm sure you would all agree. So as you have proposed, you talked about how we have to have a top-down legal basis established first, so that climate mainstreaming, ODA, can be pushed forward. And you talked about how we should have that incorporated into the Framework Act. But again, I think that there can be some confusions. So is it going to be the ODA, Framework Act on ODA, or is it going to be Framework Act on climate change, or are we going to have another act legislated? So which path do you recommend? If you're talking about the Framework Act on ODA, then there is a separate governance system that you would have to communicate with in order to bring about changes. So I believe that relevant discussions would have to be taken. And there are many other topics that I would like to comment on, but I would leave it at that with regard to my first comment.
Colleagues from BII. Very happy to meet you, because we were looking, as researchers, we were looking into building connections with some of the DFIs that we would like to benchmark. So I'm very happy to meet you today. I was not able to take a look at your presentation materials before I came here, so this was my first time learning about your strategy and your portfolio. So I will look into it further. But in the meantime, I have very simple, maybe difficult questions. One would relate to awareness. So I believe the awareness on climate change, climate risk, or the climate crisis that we are in is essential in doing anything. However, I believe we in Korea we lack both. We lack the awareness from the public. We lack awareness from the policymakers. So I would like to ask you, what were the catalysts in you doing what you do now? So what drove you to promote climate change strategy or climate mainstreaming in your institutional strategy? That would be my question one. The second one is a little more rhetorical. If you could summarize in one sentence the benefit of climate mainstreaming to your investors, how would it look like? Especially considering our circumstances where we have less awareness regarding the crisis that we are in. 네, 여기까지 하겠습니다.
네, 감사합니다. 네.
Thank you very much. Now we will move on to Mr. Shin Jong-seok. We will give the speakers time to answer later on.
Okay, Mr. Shin Jong-seok, Senior Researcher. Nice to meet you. I am Senior Researcher at Center for Global Strategy at NIGT. So before I begin, well, what was very impressive was that one panelist talked about the money, one person talked about development, and actually I'm in charge of R&D. So I think KLRI did a really good job in consisting this panel. And a lot of the panelists made some comments that overlaps with what I wanted to say too. So I want to talk about, I want to throw two topics that I would like to think about together. So first is about the scope and the purpose of ODA. I thought that deserves some thinking. So we've had some presentations and the panelists' comments today, and I would like to, you to think more about the scope and the objective of the ODA. Actually, maybe it's about how we can set up the right structure. So before we talked about public assistance, and it was helping in the past, but I think now it's a bit different. When we talk about international cooperation, it's about win-win. I think that is the main purpose of international cooperation now. So I want to pose a question. So the ODA now, is it aiming for a win-win, and is it going well? So I think this is a right time to revisit our ODA purposes and scope. And also I want to talk about the system now. So as the presenters mentioned and as the panelists have mentioned, I also feel the need for international cooperation, especially cooperation with developing countries. I think Korea does not really have a solid structure for this. So maybe I could give you some example, a recent example. So recently, Ministry of Science and Technology is developing some global R&D strategies. And the government has announced the 12 national strategic technologies and 17 net zero technologies in order to make Korea a science technology powerhouse. So, well-structured strategies are being developed to ensure cooperation with major technology leading countries, and the R&D system is being innovated to enable this. So actually, Korea is creating a global R&D strategy map, which encompasses all the researches, identifying potential partners and so on. And also, from project planning to evaluation, I believe, therefore, that we need to have a very well-structured system so that we have a good supervision of everything that is happening. And another thing I wanted to talk about was I've been involved in a lot of ODA projects and planning before. And before, it was about developing countries, to help them to leap toward the level of the advanced countries. But now, especially now, that all the countries are facing climate crisis, it's a bit different now. It's not about them following the lead of the advanced countries, but as briefly mentioned by another presenter, it's about system transition at the developing countries. So it is a time for that, to consider that, and we really have to think about how we could achieve this system transition in these developing countries. So to my memory, this term has been coined about 10 years ago. The term frog leaping is the word I want to talk about. So it's about the technological leap. Developing countries are now wanting to frog leap to come at the level of the advanced countries right away, instead of following the lead of what the advanced countries have done before. But then my question is, are we really making some innovative attempts to allow for this frog leap? I have some questions. So maybe at the research level or maybe at the working level, actual attempts need to be made. So for these topics, I would like all of us here to have a think about it. It's the same for me. I will also continue to think about how we could actually realize what we have in our minds. And I have a question for BII.
For the BII, in conditions, for example, having a kind of multilateral cooperation for global, helping the developing countries. In that case, as a project developer, I would like to ask that as an investment institution, what kind of help do you need if you are considering to have some kind of multilateral cooperation? That's just my question. 네, 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Thank you. So all the organizers are staring at me really fiercely, so I don't really think we have the time to hear all the answers. So we've had a lot of questions, but I think you should have to have side talks, But Srini wasn't close.
Thank you. To answer your question, look, I think you have to see you in 1 minute. Yes. Okay.
You can talk in private.
Oh, sure, I can talk in private. Look, I think countries like Korea have a lot of potential to address the whole transition journey, the Just Energy Transition Program, and adaptation and resilience. So and the developing countries have a lot of technology which can be given to the developed countries these days, particularly on the area of transition and also on the adaptation side. So I think it's important that we collaborate more between the developed and developing countries, because the problem of climate is common, whether you're rich or poor, it's the same. And we will have an existential crisis if we don't address it.
감사합니다. 그리고 너무 죄송하게 이렇게 시간을 끌었습니다.
Thank you once again, and thank you very much. And I ask for your kind understanding for not giving you enough time to answer the questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was session number 1. I would like to thank Mr. Kim for moderating session number 1. We were planning to break for about 15 minutes before we move on to session number 2, but as you can see, we are somewhat behind our schedule, but we will still only break for about 7 minutes, and then resume after.
Okay, so I'm sorry that the break had to be so short. I'm sure you would have appreciated more time to talk with each other, but we do have some presentations ready for today, so I will continue with today's session.
I am Jong-mee from KLRI, and I will be moderating session number 2. The topic of session number 2 is carbon neutrality and central local cooperation. In session number 1, we talked about international development cooperation. And in session number 2, we're going to move a step further and talk about, in a country, what sort of central local government cooperation is required to achieve carbon neutrality. So we will be delving deeper into this topic. In session 2, we have 1 presenter and 5 discussants. But we have only limited amount of time, and so we are going to ask the presenter to finish the presentation within 15 to 20 minutes. And as for the discussants, we will give you 5 minutes each and then wrap up today's forum. Okay, so I will introduce to you the first speaker. The first speaker is Eun-hae Chang from KLRI. She's going to talk to us about net zero plans and strategies and improving legislation accordingly. Dr. Chang is currently leading the climate change team at KLRI, and she has been researching the topic of local central government cooperation in the context of net zero. Earlier in the session number 1, we talked about the need to enact more legislations, climate-related legislation. So let's hear from Dr. Chang.
Hello, thank you for the introduction. I am Chang Eun-hae, team leader of climate change legislation team at KLRI. So I have asked the panelists to, instead of asking questions to a certain presenter, I have actually asked them to introduce what they are doing at their respective organizations. And therefore, today, what I will present is not like a complete or perfect report, but I'm making this presentation as setting the agenda for this year. So we have the Framework Act on Low Carbon Green Growth, and in 2021 we have legislated a new act. And a lot of enforcement decrees and regulations have been enacted after that. And the basic plan for low carbon green growth the national plan had been confirmed in April 2023, and the city and province level master plan needs to be established in April 2024, and then the city district borough level master plan will be established in 2025. So the basic plan, the master plan that had been confirmed last year, I want to talk about the basic directions. So it was government-led, but going forward, it will be more private and locally led. And before we were passive, but now we will be more active. And before there was inconsistency across the respective departments, but it will be now pan-governmental support and approach now. And before, the performance tracking was not so sufficient, but performance tracking will become more transparent and organized going forward. So this year, the master plan will be established at the city and province level, and the city, district, and borough level will be set the year after. And all these plans will need to consider for what I have just said. So there are some, the basic fact is that before, when we talk about climate crisis, it was more about climate and environment per se. But now, when we talk about the carbon neutrality plan, it actually encompasses all the areas of our society. So I think that is a basic assumption. And also, the new Carbon Neutrality Act is mid to long-term plan. So basically, it's 5 to 10 years. And also, the city level, the shorter term, the smaller level or the smaller scope master plans will have 10 years in the scope, and they will be revised every 5 years. And it is highly likely that the short-term plans can overlap with mid to long-term plans. So consultation was really important to coordinate and reduce the duplication. But what's important is that Korea has a tendency to put the mid to long-term plans at the highest level. So we have to think about the priority at the national level and the city level, province level. So I'm going to come back to this page later on, and now I would like to talk about this page. So the mid to long term, so there's some duplication between the mid to long term and the short term plans. So there's some legal background to reduce the duplication. So basically, the head of the central administrative organization needs to inform the CRC, the Carbon Neutrality Commission, about any changes in the master plan. And then the Carbon Neutrality Commission, CNC, will inform the relevant heads of organization regarding the change or the revision of the laws. So it's not that easy, though, because if you look at this page, this is only some of the mid to long-term plans related to the master plan for carbon neutrality. So a lot of consultation is necessary, and a lot of institutional enhancement needs to be made to support this. So how can we ensure cooperation between central and local governments to implement net zero plans and strategies? So I think this part will be covered by the CRC side, so I will move on. So the basic master plan has been fixed in 2023, and accordingly, so that master plan proposes the philosophy and the vision of the carbon neutrality and green growth policies, and also it serves as a reference. It needs to serve as a reference to ensure compatibility with relevant plans. But also we have to look at the relationship with other plans. So as I mentioned, this mid to long term, this act will be revised every 20 years. So it's a very long term. So it's not easy to proactively respond to any changes that we meet in the way. So a lot of discretion needs to be provided to the relevant organizations to maneuver the issues. So I told you that the province and the city level master plan needs to be confirmed this year. So I'm just raising a question here. So what does it need to include? It first needs to be connected or be in line with the national level policies. So therefore, the municipal level plan will have to ensure that it is led by the private sector and the local communities. And also I mentioned that the new act is a pan-governmental cooperative system. So this also being included in the city and provincial level master plan. And also the regions at the forefront of responding to actual disaster that they encounter. And all of that, how they will address all the issues or the disasters will need to be included in the city or province level master plans. So, and also the lower level, the borough level master plan will need to account for everything that is included in the city level master plan. And also it has to make sure that the key initiatives of the local governments are shared among each other. And also the city level master plan will have to make sure that they support the CRC. And for the regional side, so for example, we could think about how we could support the regions with discontinued steam power plants, and also how they can manage this carbon sinks, for example. So now I want to talk about the direction of legislative improvements. I just want to propose a direction, and maybe it could be discussed by the panelists. So we talked about mainstreaming. So we have to think about the previous law. So the previous law has some very strong provisions that it comes at so it takes precedence over any other rules or regulations, and that it needs to be coordinated and balanced with other strategies and plans. But this Framework Act on Low Carbon and Green Growth has been implemented for the past 10 years. But in Korea, there is no priority among the laws. So all the laws have the same position or status under the Constitution. But now there was criticism because this Low Carbon Green Growth Act acted as if it can be precedent over any other laws. So there were some revisions. So it says unless there is any other provisions in other laws regarding the transition to a carbon neutral society and the promotion of green growth, this law will take precedent. So the wording is a bit smoother. So this Carbon Neutrality Act did not really have that much power when the country or the government wanted to push for the strategies. So it was criticized. But 2 or 3 years had passed since the law was revised. But now the wording is softer. It doesn't really have much power. So I think this is a point to revisit what we want to do with the law. And then we have to think about how we could pursue the structured governance and pan-government integrated support system. Basically, so there is a direction or the guiding principle that all the departments cooperate. But then how are we going to apply this to the local governments? Because all the local governments do not tend to really move or engage in an action unless they are pushed by a certain department or organization at a higher level government. So how are we going to ensure that the local governments actually move and take action is a question that I want to raise. And also with the new Carbon Neutrality Act, what's important is that the role of CNC, the Carbon Neutrality Commission, had been more emphasized. So now they are in charge of deliberation and the performance tracking, but there is no legal background or basis to support this expanded role of CNC. So now we have been working towards creating these strategies and plans, but now we have to think about what regulations and laws are necessary in order for all of these plans and strategies to have strength. And now I want to talk about the manpower and the supporting organizations. So whatever policies it may be, what's most important is that there has to be a team, there has to be people to push for this, but this is not really easy. So new institutions or systems have been introduced with the Carbon Neutrality Act. So for example, the Supervisor for Carbon Neutrality Implementation and the Net Zero Support Center or Regional Carbon Neutrality Commission have been newly formed. But as for the Supervisor for Carbon Neutrality Implementation, what do we need to make sure that supervisor can perform its role? Do we have to specify the roles and responsibilities of this person, or do we need some laws or regulations? Because it may differ, the result may differ according to who becomes the head or the governor of a certain province. Because if that person is not really, the governor is not really interested in climate actions, then the supervisor will not really have a job. And secondly, we held some forum and we felt the need to create the carbon neutral centers. So we only have a few now, but they have been established. And we have to make sure that the carbon neutral centers have the right people and resources to perform its roles. And then how are we going to give power to these centers is something that we have to think about. And also, how can we support the local or the regional CNC offices? The central CNC commission, the commission works really well by itself. However, the regional offices need to be empowered and need to have support so that they could actually perform the expected jobs. So if we're going to create some, laws, then what kind of laws do we need to empower them? So lastly, how can the government allocate budget to support the local governments? So usually when at times of budget allocation, maybe we could just allocate budget as ordinary budget without specifying the purpose. But carbon neutrality can be very broad. So there is one way to specify the purpose, who uses what for which purpose. But again, as I mentioned, people is important. So if carbon neutrality is not a priority area of that specific local government, then climate may not get any budget at all. So the current law specifies the purpose of the budget. But then in that case, the local government has to get like $5 from the Ministry of the Environment and $5 from the Climate Department. So it's really difficult to coordinate the use of the budget. So I would like the panelists to discuss how we could better allocate the budgets.
Thank you very much, and especially for keeping the time. Okay, then I would like to invite the panel discussants so we can begin the discussion session. As I mentioned earlier, we have 5 panel discussants with us, so I'd like to kindly ask all of you to join us on stage. While they're taking seats, allow me to introduce our panel discussants. First of all, from 2050 Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission, Just Transition Division, we have Director Jong Kwang-young. And from Chungcheongnam-do Carbon Neutrality Policy Division, we have Do Jong-won. And from Seoul Government, we have Climate and Environmental Policy Division Team Leader Kim Tae-hwan, and from Gangwon, the Carbon Neutral Policy Center, Park Soo-jin, and finally from Gwangju Carbon Neutral Center, we have Director Kim Tae-ho. The panel discussants actually represent different regions in Korea, and they're very much active in their roles and activities. So I think that they're very well positioned to share with us their regional policies and also policy directions. I'm sure you have prepared a lot for this panel discussion, but I think that because of the time constriction, we can only spare 5 minutes each. So according to the program, I will first give the microphone to Mr. Chung. Yes, hello. I am from 2050 Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth Commission. I am Jong Kwang-young. I would like to thank Dr. Chung from KLRI for the presentation. Thank you very much for pointing out all the details regarding the legislation and its improvements. So if you think about it, this is my personal view. I thought that if Korean legislation lists out each and every things, which was the case with Korean acts, that could lead to a lot of problems. But at the same time, different experts could have different ideas. Compared to other countries, Korea was the 14th country in the world to enact the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth. And again, there are other countries that came before Korea, but Korea was the 14th to enact the legislation related to climate change. So we have transition, building, waste, and transportation, and all these sectors. And the goal ultimately is to go net zero by 2050. And at municipal level, for city and provincials, we have 17 of them. And by April, and for 226 county level governments, by next year April, they will have to come up with their basic plans. In my view, for carbon neutrality and green growth and to transition our society towards that direction, I believe that local and municipal governments' roles are important. And to make that happen, I believe that central and local government communication is important. And So I would like to lay out 4 different methods. First of all, I believe that locally customized carbon neutrality and green growth strategies need to be set up. Different regions with regard to carbon neutrality may have different strategies. If you are a larger city and if you are a city with a lot of industries, and if you have both of them, then I think that you will require different strategies. So befitting each condition, I believe that we have to set up a different carbon neutrality strategy. And second, we have residents. I think that we have to create a space like carbon neutrality city and hydrogen city. For example, like you can have 10 areas, carbon neutrality cities, and also like 5 different cities for hydrogen cities. And we also have to set up implementation system. So we have carbon neutral centers, and together with them, we are supposed to set up an infrastructure to implement them and to facilitate communication between local and central government. We need to have regular meetings, and we also have chairman meetings, and per regions we also have different forums to share ideas. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to go beyond central local government cooperation and also focus on local government collaboration. Central government can only do so far and do so much, and I believe that local governments need to collaborate in order to trickle down their best practices amongst each other. And the municipal governments and also local governments, of course, need to make efforts, but at the same time, the entire population of Korea need to raise their awareness with regard to carbon neutrality and green growth, so that we can accelerate the transition. So again, at the country level, in order for us to become carbon neutral, I think that we have to have a paradigm shift. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. So you talked about having a right system to achieve net zero. And it was not in the presentation. You also mentioned that the cooperation between the regions is also important. Now I would like to invite Mr. Do Jung-won of Chungcheongnam-do to speak. Hello, my name is Do Jung-won, team leader of Carbon Neutral Policy Division at Chungcheongnam-do. So Chungcheongnam-do is actually notorious because 29 of 50 fossil fuel power plants are in Chungcheongnam-do. So, we have Hyundai Steel mill and so on. So people say that the whole country is covered by the pollutants emitted by Chungcheongnam-do. So we are making efforts to get rid of this notorious name. So we actually hold conference every year for this purpose, and I'm very delighted to be here to be part of the Green Week hosted by the British Embassy. So I'm very happy to be here because, Mr. Gareth Weir, you always come to the conference every year, so it's nice to meet you. So as mentioned earlier, Chungcheongnam-do is producing a lot of pollutants, so we're making a lot of efforts. So the master plan, the carbon neutrality plan, we are at the final stage of finalizing it. But there are certain regions where we have to think about just transitions in those areas where the fossil fuel power plants have been discontinued. So think about the power that has been produced by these 29 fossil fuel power plants. Out of all the power produced by these areas, 60% of the produced power is consumed by Seoul. But a lot of these plants are being closed down. Then what are we going to do to revitalize the economies of these regions is another concern for us. So we have to think about just transition, and it has to be included in our carbon neutrality master plan. And we have been raising issues to the central government and the relevant ministry. So And we are also doing a lot of things to come up with an alternative source of energy. So there's something that I would like to comment about the basic plan for carbon neutrality. So as mentioned earlier, the regional characteristics need to be included or reflected. So as I mentioned, a lot of steel mills are in our area, and not only CO2, but methane is also produced in big portions by Chungcheongnam-do. So we can think about, carbon sinks and methane sinks, but on top of that, we are trying to find measures to reduce or mitigate the methane production. So we are, of course, working, and actually we need to desperately work harder with the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Industries so that just transition can be pursued together jointly with the central government. And this has been mentioned briefly in the previous session too. I think international cooperation is also very important for this purpose. As mentioned earlier, Chungcheongnam-do hosts international conferences every year. And the just transition for the closure of fossil fuel power plants, we have cited a lot of best practices and a lot of the climate group. So we are also collaborating with the climate group after the Paris Accord to come up with some countermeasures. And we were desperate to reduce the pollutants. So we actually revised the province Chungcheongnam-do ordinance so that we could control the production of carbon. And we got a lot of help from this private organization. So therefore, international cooperation is really important for us. And Chungcheongnam-do has been is the chair of the Under 2 group and of the Under 2 coalition. And also, we are the leader of the regional governor head group and meetings. So through collaboration across the regions, if we could share information across the regions, I think it will be very helpful for our projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give him a hand. So he talked about fossil fuel power plants and how they are concentrated in Chungcheongnam-do and how they're trying to incorporate that characteristic into their policies and what future plans they have going forward. Moving on from Seoul Metropolitan City Government, we have Mr. Kim Tae-hwan. You have the mic. Yes, hello. I am Kim Tae-hwan, team leader of Climate Environment Policy Division from Seoul. Carbon neutrality, what sort of achievements we had, and also what our future directions are was the question that I was given to address. So today I'm going to talk about the policies that we have implemented so far and what future plans we have. So City in 2020 has set up 2050 carbon neutrality vision, and short term from 2020 to for 5 years, we have set up a carbon neutrality plan. So by 2030, our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40%, and by 2050, become net zero. And if you look at our actual outcome, in 2022, we actually emitted 47 million tons of greenhouse gases. Back in 2005, it was 52 million tons, so that's a reduction of about 10%. As you have seen, the Korean government, starting from the 70s, you can see that we have been emitting more and more carbon, and 2014 there was a dip. However, Seoul City, starting from 2020, you can see that we are greenhouse gas emissions is on a downward trend. Seoul obviously is a large city, and because of that, building actually takes up the largest share of our emissions, about 67%, and transportation about 18%. So together, building and transportation take up about 85% of our total emissions. We are trying to roll out EVs so that transportation and also waste, the emissions are decreasing. However, unfortunately, when it comes to the sector of building, as buildings are consume more energy and I think that in the building sector, we see an increase, unlike other sectors. So we are cognizant of that fact. And going forward, we are going to concentrate our resources on the sector of buildings so that buildings' greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced. In the future, specifically in the sector of building, we are going to focus on the new buildings. Now, in the past, when building new buildings, we focused on having zero energy buildings and also energy efficiency enhancement were the areas that we focused on. However, we understand that they're not enough. So we're trying to focus on life cycle. We are going to introduce a mechanism where we monitor the life cycle emission of buildings. So for all these different buildings in Seoul, we're going to have a ranking system starting from this year, from the public sector first, and then in 2025 we're going to roll out the mechanism to the private sector, and then soon onwards we're going to measure and monitor the total amount of greenhouse gases emitted by all these buildings. So for example, when I say ranking system or grading system from A to B, A to D, starting from 2017 to 2019, that we're going to use it as our baseline, what their greenhouse gas emissions were for 2017 until 2019, based on the baseline, we are going to have the different grading A to D for different buildings. I actually looked at the case of New York, and by introducing that grading system for the buildings, they were able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 20%. So benchmarking that, we're going to also introduce that grading system for the buildings, and we are going to eventually come up with a mechanism whereby we will be limiting the total emissions. And we're going to also continue on with our low carbon emitting building programs. We are going to roll out this mechanism to 950,000 buildings and eventually 1 million. And we're going to also focus on EVs as well. So 2030, our plan is to have 30% EVs. And this April, we're going to come up with the basic plan, and we have some forecasts included. And we did some simulation, and if we implement all these plans, we understand that by 2030 we will be able to successfully achieve a 40% reduction. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation on Seoul City's policies and also future plans. And I was asked to, if any, propose some suggestions. So again, we're trying to put together a basic plan for carbon neutrality, and Seoul City building, transportation and waste, about 91% of the emission comes from energy. And energy definitely takes up a big portion. So out of the total greenhouse gas emissions, indirect energy would take up about 49%, and so we don't actually generate any power. Mostly, as you heard from the gentleman next to me, we actually procure our energy from Chungcheongnam-do and elsewhere. So the energy mix for Seoul is basically non-existent. So through the energy mix, or whether it's through the renewables, the central government has to reduce them so that we can achieve carbon neutrality in the energy sector as well. So our target, as we were setting up our targets, one challenge was that the central government was setting goals for 2030 and 2035 and so forth. However, for Seoul City government, we're trying to come up with annual plans. But since the central government doesn't have that, it's really difficult for us to set annual targets and annual plans. So again, I would like to take this opportunity to call on the central government to provide us with annual energy mix targets. But obviously, there are some difficulties. So I would like to once again plead the central government do so. As KLRI speaker mentioned, we talked about budget and how the Carbon Neutrality Commission has to be legislated. I think that this is a must. Seoul City completely sides with you that we have to have a commission that is a legislative body. And with regard to budget, listening to the presentation, I thought that instead of allocating budget, if you were to given the funds, for example, like climate neutrality fund, then the sole purpose for that fund would be to work on climate action. So I think that that will drive us towards carbon neutrality in a more efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you. So you talked about the building sector, that it is being well controlled in Seoul City. And also you mentioned that legislation is necessary in certain areas. So next, I would like to give the mic to Director Park Soo-jin. Hello, my name is Park Soo-jin, Director of Climate Environmental Research Department. So I want to talk about the cooperative efforts and carbon neutrality in Gangwon, self-governing province. So as for Gangwon, in April this year, we will be announcing the master plan for carbon neutrality, which is 10 years earlier than the original plan. So Gangwon-do is producing about 6% of the national emissions. So there are 18 cities or provinces in Gangwon, and about 6 of them have already achieved net zero in Gangwon province. And so we are producing less carbon, and also we have a lot of forests in Gangwon province. So we absorb a lot of carbon too. So considering the carbon absorption, we are absorbing about 29% of nationwide carbon. So we're kind of a lung of Korea. But then on the other hand, there are some downsides too. We have to think about the population cliff. And the population is shrinking really quickly, so we have about 20 to 40,000 population in Gangwon area. So we are very small in terms of the number of people or residents. So what are we focusing on at the moment? So if you look at the basic plan for low carbon green growth, so all the local governments are supposed to set up their own plans about the emissions in consideration of the characteristics of the respective regions. So I think maybe it's a good idea to, or a better idea, to have the carbon neutrality plans set up by the smaller or lower level governments, considering the characteristics of the different states and the cities. And residents in Gangwon area are not really aware of carbon neutrality or the climate issue. So I think it is important to raise their awareness of the climate policies. And also, a lot of conflicts are arising because of carbon emissions. So if the basic carbon neutrality plan can be created or developed at a lower level government, I think it could better cater for the situations of the different cities and regions. I want to talk about Gangwon City a little bit. So about 87% of the carbon emitted by Gangwon is to be controlled by the central government, and the remaining 30% is to be controlled by the local government. And if you look at the 13%, the 56% of the emissions come from buildings, and then 26% come from transportation. So as for the building sector, as for the public buildings, so we have raised the bar to raise the bar regarding the building efficiency, energy efficiency. But there's a lot of issues in the private buildings. So Gangwon area is a touristic city, so there are big resorts, big hotels in Gangwon region. And so to these facilities, what measures can we take to better control them in terms of their building efficiency is something that we need to work on going forward. And private sector will need some support to better control their energy efficiency too. And as for the carbon neutrality master plan, I want to talk about the priorities. So as mentioned briefly earlier, 6 regions in Gangwon province have already achieved net zero, and we have small population, and we have low level of awareness regarding carbon neutrality, and therefore it's only the government, the local government, that is really aware and ambitious about the carbon goals. So maybe carbon neutrality needs to become a mainstream for all the projects and businesses that are done in the Gangwon area. And you talked about the role of Carbon Neutrality Commission. And maybe the role of the regional CNC office can be strengthened. And if they can be empowered, maybe we could have a better plan. And one more thing, as for Gangwon self-governing province, we also have a lot of military bases. And the thing is that a lot of wastes are being produced by these military bases, but they are not measured. We don't know how much is produced by these military bases. So these military bases are working hard to meet net zero, but we don't really know how much they are actually producing or reducing. So we want to make sure that they participate in this effort. So I think there has to be some measures to ensure this. And somebody mentioned about governance, and I think here what's most important is the participation of the residents in our province. So how can we encourage the participation and the engagement of the residents, and how can the policies be better accepted by the residents? Maybe more promotion, PR, or education on carbon neutrality could be provided for our residents, and it could be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Sujin Park, and I think that he talked about carbon neutrality policies befitting the region Gangwon. Finally, from Gwangju Carbon Neutral Center, we have Mr. Kim Tae-ho. Yes, I'm all the way from Gwangju, and because it's a suburb area, I'm not very used to using a microphone. But anyways, I would like to take this moment to introduce to you what we are doing in Gwangju to achieve net zero, and what collaboration we are making. In 2004, we actually declared to become a solar city, and we spearhead efforts in order to roll out solar PVs. So since then onwards, actually, we announced the greenhouse gas reduction targets. Afterwards, together with the Ministry of Environment, we decided to designate ourselves as a pilot city to become green. And we've announced to become carbon neutral by 2045. So different cities came together to declare that, and I think that we have come a long way, starting from 2009, and every year we have assessed the implementation of our efforts. And starting from 2009, in Gwangju City, I've been responsible for climate change policies. So I would like to share with you my proposals for better collaboration based on that experience. So I think that a lot of institutions were laid out and policies were laid out, GIS-based systems were built in order to track greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and buildings and so forth. However, despite our efforts, I think that from buildings and transportation, we saw an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And because of urbanization, we see more emissions. And mainstreaming throughout the region is a challenge that we encounter, and also concrete measures are missing. So I think that what's important is to implement different institutions, and also we are going to increase our capabilities to make our plans a reality. I don't think that I need to repeat what the basic plan of ours is. However, with regard to cooperation, in order for us to have concrete action plans, I think that things can be improved. When it comes to budget, we have something called greenhouse gas reduction sensitive budget, and for planning, there are some institutions and systems in place to track the plans. Gwangju started these efforts last year, and aside from what's listed in the legislation, we have set mid to long-term plans, and we've started reviewing them already. So last year, we revisited the basic plan for urban development. And so we have different experts coming together to review them. And then the committee will review the opinions from the experts. And then the committee will relay the result to different divisions in the government, local government. So I think that there are two areas where we need a lot of support. When it comes to sensitive budget, I think that the categorization is not that clear. So there are still controversies. Are we going to focus on reduction, or are we going to focus on emission? So how are we going to categorize emitters, and how are we going to mobilize changes using what method, and also classification needs to be in place. And gender-sensitive centers are in place. And we have 3 to 5 people providing consulting in a systematic way. However, for green and climate, I think that we don't have the resources to do so. And for prior review system, we have a prior review and also feedback systems in place. And how are we going to have the carbon neutrality basic plan that make it more compatible with climate crisis and adaptation plans? And in order to have concrete actions, I think that there has to be some administrative measures. If you think about green growth policy, we have green growth supervisor and we have the manpowers. However, for carbon neutrality, we have division head that are responsible, but they have no coordination authority. So there is one supervisor with that title, but he is not, or she is not able to control everything. So for carbon neutrality supervisor, that hat was worn by a different person. And I think that regional carbon neutrality committee is also similar. I think that they may act in silo, and there are some differences depending on the region. Some may have them, some may not. And so there is a huge gap between different regions. And so how are we going to come up with a system that can accelerate the move? And I think that prior review system can be very helpful. So the committee meets 2 years every year. They review and assess what they have done in the previous year and set this year's goal. And they also come back and meet in the later year. But if we have prior review system in place, then I think that they will be reviewing ordinances and also administrative measures. Then I think that we can also set up sub-committees. So by having this prior review system and also having the committee act accordingly, then I think that we can enhance efficiency. I think that currently we are looking at reduction intensity when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. And starting from 2009, we have done implementation assessments, but for intensity, about 9.5 million tons were tracked. The reason why is because I think that whichever projects that receive government budget would be included in the scope. However, I think that not just managing each project, but I think that monitoring whether or not the actual emissions are decreasing is more important. So I think that we have to switch the gear and focus more on tracking the total emissions. And to make that happen, we have to come up with the different indicators or indexes. So although we may be doing good in terms of our projects, I think that the emissions can actually end up increasing. And when it comes to legislation, I think that inventory needs to be tracked. For municipal governments, I think that for our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to understand where the emissions are coming from and whether or not we have the means to offset them. But the current system in place is simply receiving whatever statistics the central government has drafted. So by law, I think that the emission guidelines and also strategies needs to be put in place, and regional committees need to track and verify, so that we can have some sort of a bottom-up approach when it comes to tracking and monitoring the emissions. Yeah, it's time to wrap up, please. The Framework Act also has some problems other than these. As I mentioned earlier, there are so many different relevant legislations. We heard about Gwangju, and they have different, like 57 ordinances that are related. And they also have basic ordinance. The ordinances need to reflect the ideas and spirits of the Framework Act, but not all of them may be that. So I've talked about budgeting. The green bond and also fund is something that we need to think about. So that was a rather long discussion. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have CNC, who is responsible for the overall net zero policies in Korea. And also we have representatives of some leading regions in carbon neutrality. So I'm sorry that I wasn't able to give a lot of time for all of you participants. So it may not be a question, but is there anything that you would like to answer? Any questions that were raised earlier that you would like to answer? I think I could give 1 minute for you. So we will summarize all the comments from today's discussion, and whether it's discussion or a meeting, I'll make sure to deliver it to the Minister of Industries and Minister of Environment, and we will also reflect it in our work too. So when we meet with the regions, we always think about this. So today we have Chungnam, Chungcheongnam-do, Seoul, Gangwon, and Gwangju. But these 4 regions are the leading regions in Korea. They are doing net zero really well. But the thing is that we have a lot of difference and gap across the regions. The reason we have concerns about legislation is that we have to make sure that all the laws are equitable and can be applied to everybody and everywhere and produce as little gap as possible. But Gwangju, you've been doing well since 2007, regardless of legislation. And in case of the regions, local governments, they don't have the legal basis to use or allocate budgets for carbon neutrality, but you have been doing that already without the law. But the reason we want to legislate these efforts is because we want to make sure that all the other regions come up to this level too. So we will take all of your comments and we will try hard to reflect it in the systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, we would like to wrap up session number 2. Thank you very much to all the presenters and discussants. Now, please return to your seats. Thank you. Now, finally, last but not least, we have the closing session. Our co-host, British Embassy, Seoul. From the embassy, we have Deputy Head of Mission, Mr. Gareth Beer. So he's here with us for closing remarks.
Thank you.
Well, 안녕하세요. Thank you very much. What a packed 3 hours of conversation. So firstly, just want to thank all the organisers that have put this event together. I know it's not easy, so thank you very much for all the work you've done, and the members of British Embassy Seoul as well in that. Thank you to the speakers and panellists. Really important. So one of our ambitions this week in doing Green Week is to bring together lots of different voices and to share and to learn. And I think today has been a brilliant example of that from lots of different perspectives. I've got a long checkered history in international development, very, very passionate about climate change and poverty, and so really interesting to hear how it comes to life in these conversations. But I have 3 takeaways, so I've been busily trying to synthesize all the information into 3 key points. So first, a helpful reminder, I think, that the climate crisis is not like a single country, single issue crisis. We have talked today about the fact that this is a crisis that can't be put into a silo. It affects the rich and the poor, countries and people. All countries, all people will be impacted in some way by climate change. It affects all the different sectors that we work in, central, local, etc. So therefore, the solution cannot be owned by any particular part of society or a country. So that's the first point, and there's a helpful reminder just in the range of people talking about it today. The second then, I think, is the fact that we've talked about how we then integrate climate into all of our policies, frankly. So when you're thinking about your education policy, your science and technology policy, your international development policy, your security and foreign policy, climate should be part of those discussions. But I think we had a really useful discussion first session about international development and the things that we need to try and get right together, like sound legal basis for doing it, the governance required. Whatever you do, I think the important thing, as we've learned a bit from the UK experience, is the importance to have a clear signal that this is the direction of travel and real clarity of a plan that you can then work with. The second thing I took away was the human element, because we're all people. We all live in these systems. So ultimately, it's about the incentives. So whatever the system is, people respond to incentives, whether you're a person filling in a marker about whether this is climate or not, or whether you are a business thinking about how you might green something or not. It's about the incentives that we put in place to ensure that we genuinely integrate climate into our processes. So that's the second thing. And then finally, the third thing, collaboration really came out strongly in all of the different conversations. This is a whole of society challenge, requires whole of society solutions, and therefore we need collaboration. We need citizens engaged in the discourse, in the governance, in the choices that impact all of us as citizens. We need central and local government. I thought this was an excellent session just now, hearing from 4 different regions about what it means from their perspective and the value of engaging and collaborating across central and local. We need business and DFIs involved. This is not a solution that government owns. This requires private sector. It requires change incentives for private sector, and that's exactly what DFIs are there to do. As they said, it's about crowding in private sector. So I was struck by those 3 things. It's not a single issue. It's a whole of society challenge. We need to therefore integrate climate into all of our work and policies, and we need to collaborate therefore right across the different spectrum of our society. Those are 3 big takeaways, and there was lots and lots of great detail in all of that. But again, wants to say thank you very much from British Embassy Seoul. Really proud to be part of this, and I hope this is something we can continue the discussion on as we work together with the UK and Korea to try and tackle climate change together. So, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weir. So again, as our Deputy Head of Mission mentioned, we had a very compact 3-hour seminar. So with that, we would like to wrap up today's seminar entitled Establishing a Collaborative System for Realizing Carbon Neutrality, prepared jointly by British Embassy Seoul and also KLRI. Thank you again for joining us in person and also over the YouTube. Thank you, and I hope that today's session was rewarding to all of you. Thank you and goodbye.